It was very, very sudden. It was very, very unexpected. I can't begin to tell you how shocking it was. And I very quickly realised that I now was a single parent and I didn't understand what had happened. I didn't understand anything at that point.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Burnt Chef Journal, a hospitality-specific podcast dedicated to challenging mental health stigma and conversations designed to inspire a new, healthier, happier, and more sustainable hospitality profession. This week, I am joined by Angela Samata. This episode's a little bit harder hitting than your usual Burnt Chef Journal episode, as she joins us to talk about the documentary that she put together and presented, Life After Suicide, which was nominated by the BBC for a BAFTA. In this documentary, she describes her own experience and that of her children after her partner Mark took his own life 20 years ago. Not many people know that Mark was actually a chef, and Angela is a passionate campaigner and advocate for addressing suicide and stigma around suicide. So the conversation is heavily revolved around this particular subject matter, but it was so enjoyable chatting to Angela. I couldn't think of anyone better for this conversation, and it was an absolute pleasure to have her on board. The Burnt Chef project is proudly sponsored by Lamb Weston, a leading provider of innovative, high-quality potato products created for chefs to help operators thrive both today and tomorrow. Working carefully with sustainably minded farmers and growers, Lamb Weston provides potato solutions for every type of kitchen, from premium British chips and fries to potato shapes, wedges and mash. To find out more, head to lambweston.eu or search your partner in potatoes.
I'm trying to get a bit better at managing the diary and managing my energy levels, I suppose, really. And I also realise that sometimes when, the same as you, when I do interviews or get involved with different projects, I'm absolutely knackered at the end of it. And I think I just thought I could carry on going and going and going, but actually just trying to make sure that I don't, just because the day looks clear in the diary, trying not to put too much stuff in, because I just end up being completely wiped at the end of the week. So yeah, just trying to be a bit more careful about things, but I'm not quite sure how successful I'm being at that.
That's tricky. I've noticed that one of my team members has started putting in out of office days into my diary, and I get to the day and I was like, why am I out of the office today? What's happening? And she was like, nothing. You've got nothing on today. It's your day. Do what you want. And I'm like, okay, I'll take that. It's like a little blessing from time to time. Just have a day where you go, oh, fuck, yeah, I don't have to do anything today. Or I can catch up on the 82 emails and the projects that I've just been putting to one side,
No, absolutely. Absolutely. It's just so good to have catch-up time, I think. And yeah.
We put a post out, actually, that resonated quite. My social media marketing manager, she's just incredible. And she put a post out about it's okay to say no and empowering people to say no, because especially in the service industry, we're so used to saying, yes, of course, like whatever we can do for you. And I read it and I was like, oh yeah, perhaps it is okay to actually say no and to give yourself a little bit of a breathing space, which I know isn't always the case. Sometimes you have to keep going, but to know that you are a human being with the power to be able to say no is important, right?
Absolutely. And I think what I'm finding is when I'm working across lots of different industries, so because I work in the arts and also I work in mental health as well, and obviously have my own lived experience of being bereaved by suicide, because I work across lots of different industries, what I've noticed is that the kind of hospitality industry and people who work in kitchens and across hospitality kind of wide, the traits are kind of very similar. Like, we're real people pleasers. We do it because we love it. We do it because we're trying to give people a really good time. We're doing it because exactly the same motivation as like nurses and police. And I see the same motivation across so many different industries. It is that kind of really wanting to look after people, to problem solve, to give them the best time, to kind of make their lives a little bit better just for that short time that we have the interaction with them. And actually, it can mean that sometimes we're not having the best time. But I think you kind of constantly want to put out. And I think it's a natural yeah, it seems to be something that I'm seeing like a lot with across lots of the different people that I work with. Just not so good at making sure we're having a good time, really.
Yeah, well, I just suppose we're never taught, and I guess that's what COVID has done in a bit of a way, that actually has given us that moment of, oh, hold on a second, health is wealth at this moment in time. It's not all about doing it until I've bust a gut, because we know from experience now that that doesn't work. And I still think that there is that. We've got hundreds of years of that culture. You just keep going. You'll be fine. You'll just, especially with that macho, perhaps stoicism that we have, for all the right and wrong reasons, have adopted. It just now means that we've just got to keep. We feel like we've got to keep pushing on, because we feel guilty if we don't continue to keep driving forward, often at the detriment of ourselves. It's just bonkers. It's just mad.
So my heritage is Greek. So my father was Greek Cypriot and my mum's from Italian heritage. So we're all about the food, all about the, lots of macho stuff going on. But then I realized that macho actually means fight in Greek. So ancient Greek, it was the word for fight and for battle. And I think that is the kind of culture that we're looking at. But actually, sometimes it's not just a male thing. I think sometimes in Greek culture, Greek women kind of crack on, that everything could be falling down around and they can be dealing with like huge, massive life events, but they will still make sure there's dinner on the table. They will still hold the household together. I think sometimes kind of we're as guilty as the men in our lives, really, for kind of getting up and cracking on and putting your game face on and powering on through whatever it is. So for me, it's not just a male issue. It's an issue that I think goes across kind of, I don't think it's got a gender boundary here. I think sometimes women, I don't know, sometimes we're the glue that holds people and places and restaurants and whatever it is and households together. But I think sometimes, I don't know, we kind of don't give ourselves a break, really, because we're so busy kind of being matriarchal and kind of taking care of everybody. And I know I'm definitely guilty of that, definitely.
Yeah, and then no, see, it's an insightful point of view. I completely agree. I was having a conversation with one of our ambassadors, Julia, recently, and we were talking about actually the power that women could have on hospitality if more women were to come and work in hospitality, because there's a natural, as you say, there's this matriarchal holding things together, but there's a natural empathy and level of connection that perhaps you don't receive in that quite macho male culture. But I think that, at the moment with the, 70-30% split, it'd be lovely to be able to, all the things that perhaps you would hear that deemed as signs of weakness. You can't be vulnerable. You can't show your emotions because it's a sign of weakness. Actually, I think are massive, massive pillars of strength. And we need both men and also women bringing about a change whereby you can actually be a little bit more, you can show empathy, you can show caring, and it will actually help improve the working environment rather than damaging it, as we're led to believe.
Well, I don't know. I think balance is always good. I think always pushing to have kind of equal representation across loads of different fields. So I think that equality would be good. But I think the other thing that we often see in women is a greater reach out when it comes to help seeking behaviour. So if things are not feeling okay, if there's just something that's a little bit out of kilter, if something's not quite right, often we see help-seeking behaviour demonstrated by women in a different way than we see in men. And so, like, we set up a place here in Liverpool for men specifically for men who are feeling suicidal, called James's Place. And lots of the phone calls we got in the early days were women. And it was like, why are women ringing up? And on the calls, it was women who were ringing up because they were really worried about a guy in their lives, or they were trying to gather information before they started having a conversation that might lead to the guy coming to James's Place, And it was really, really noticeable that help-seeking behaviour was predominantly being led by women who were really worried about friends, brothers, uncles, dads, lovers, whoever it was, boyfriends, whatever. But it was really, really interesting how they would lead. But then we get the second phone call and that would be the guy ringing. So just trying to really model that help-seeking behaviour and really trying to kind of demonstrate how to do it really, or how it might work, and that it's not a sign of weakness, the exact opposite really. But again, there was some modelling going on there that was really starting to rub off quite quickly. So yeah, it's something that I would definitely like to see more of.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, we've gone off on a complete and utter tangent, which I love, because twice now we've spoken, and each time we just like,
Sorry.
it's like we've not seen each other for ages, and we just pick up from where we left off. So, I have obviously hit record as well. So people have been listening into this now for a good 12 minutes, which I think, this is where, especially after our last conversation, we spoke for a good 40 minutes, and I was like, oh, we should be recording this as well, because there's so many decent stuff covered. But to try and bring it back a little bit and to gently introduce you to the audience, obviously, for those who don't know you, you presented a BAFTA-nominated documentary called Life After Suicide. Could you just explain a little bit to the audience exactly sort of why you put that documentary together and why it is you do the work that you do currently, please?
Sure, yeah. It goes back almost 20 years. So we as a family were living on the Wirral, and we had 2 children. We had a 13-year-old and a 3-year-old. So we thought we got very lucky. We'd had a 10-year gap in between, in between babies. And it was 2003. So there was Mark, my partner, and our 2 boys and I. Things were going okay, but our relationship started to break down a little bit, and we decided that completely amicably that we would live apart for a little while. We'd been together a long time. We met in school. I was in 6th form. He was in the 5th year. And, my friends were saying to me, what are you doing going out with the 5th year? And his friends were saying to him, oh my God, you've scored a 6th former. That's amazing. So there was kind of all this going on, and it was amazing times. And we met in 1988. And so anyway, things were not going exactly as we planned, but we'd been together a long time. And Mark was a chef, and he was working in a kitchen at the time, which was kind of quite fine dining, and it had like a spa attached to it. So there were lots of different elements to the work that he was doing as a chef. And I was working in an art gallery, and I'd just got my first job in the art world, and I thought that things were going okay. But unfortunately, it was only 3 weeks later after I started work in the art gallery that I spoke to Mark. In fact, actually what happened was I got a phone call from work saying that he hadn't gone to work that day, which was really unusual. And did I know where he was? And it was that awful phone call that you get where you can hear the kitchen going in the background, and you can hear everybody's busy, and that he should be in work, and you can hear pots and pans, and so instantly I just thought something's not right. But it wasn't until later on in that day that actually, when I got home, I discovered that Mark had in fact ended his life, and it was very, very sudden. It was very, very unexpected. I can't begin to tell you how shocking it was. And I very quickly realised that I now was a single parent, and I didn't understand what had happened. I didn't understand anything at that point. But I knew that I had a 3-year-old and a 13-year-old that I needed to kind of carry on for and try and understand what had happened and try and navigate our way through this absolutely horrendous, tragic, shocking situation that we now found ourselves in. And that's kind of where the work started, really, because I didn't know anybody else who'd been bereaved in this way. I didn't know anybody else who had, I was a widow at 32. From the morning when we all went off and the kids went to school and I went to work and I thought Mark went to work, by 6:00 that night, our whole lives had completely changed. And I suppose it was just kind of me trying to navigate my kids through this, my whole family trying to understand what had happened, Mark's family trying to understand our friends, really led to lots and lots of conversations with other people that this had happened to. And really, it was about me trying to understand and trying to get answers for my kids and trying to answer my kids' questions. That really took me into working specifically in suicide prevention for men. And so what's actually happened in the subsequent years is that my career in the art world, I'm very lucky to have a successful career in the art world, curating shows and working in galleries and all kinds of things. But I have always, from that day on, worked in men's suicide prevention and postvention, how we support people after somebody's ended their life. And I suppose lots of the work culminated in the BBC knocking on the door in 2016 and asking me to present the programme, the documentary that you mentioned. And I suppose the 12 years in between, I'd spent a long time trying to get people to talk about this, trying to get people to talk openly and honestly about how they felt. Because when we tried to piece the data together that Mark had, we couldn't find any moment or anybody that he told about the way that he felt and how long he'd felt like that. And he hadn't told me. He hadn't told his friends, as far as we know. Nobody's ever come to me in the 20 years and said, actually, he did talk to me about this. He didn't leave a note. I thought at the time there were no signs that he was feeling suicidal or that he'd ever even contemplated ending his life before that. And now I know different. It's kind of a real case of I wish I knew then what I know now. But it's been a real learning curve. And so I suppose the documentary and the chance to present the documentary was really me saying, okay, it's time to kind of put my money where my mouth is. I've been trying to get people to talk about this. So now I've got to be open and honest about our experience as well. So it went on prime time, BBC1, 9:00. You don't kind of get any more high profile than that, to put the worst time in your life on TV. And we did it, and we talked to loads of different people who'd had a similar experience, people who'd felt suicidal, people who had been bereaved by suicide. And we looked at the issue as a whole. Lots of people got in touch afterwards to say that actually it's kind of helped them to know that they're not the only person that this has happened to as well.
Thank you, first and foremost, for sharing, because I know that even 20 years, it must be difficult, but it's such an important subject to be discussing. And I know for many people listening to this now, if you've been with us for the last 20 minutes, you're probably thinking, oh, crikey, this is quite heavy. But the reality of it is that the reason it feels heavy is because people don't talk about it nearly enough. When was it, in late 70s, early 80s, that suicide was a crime, wasn't it? Was it deemed illegal if you had a failed suicide attempt?
In the UK, it was decriminalised in 1961. But before that, if you tried to end your life, it was actually a criminal offence. I mean, way back in England, if you tried to end your life, you could be put in prison. And in places like Jersey and Guernsey, I think, it was still a crime until 2003. And those islands are built on their hospitality industries, So again, there's loads of places in the world where it's still a criminal offence. And I think for me, it's been about, where's this stigma coming from? Like, why was this beautiful, articulate, talented guy that I was fortunate enough to have 2 children with, why did he not tell anybody how he was feeling? Why did he feel either the stigma or unable for whatever reason? Why couldn't he tell anybody that he was just about to make this massive, massive decision? We talked about what colour the wallpaper was going to be. We talked about what we were going to have for dinner. We talked about all kinds of things. And yet this massive, huge decision we didn't talk about. And I think for me, it really opened my eyes, and it made me worry that how many other people are feeling like this and not talking about it, or not telling anyone, or not knowing where to turn or who to tell or how to tell someone, And so I think that's why I agreed to make the film, and I'm really glad I did. It was a tricky decision to kind of do it. And the BBC have shown it every year since. But for me, loads of people came forward and said, actually, thank you so much for talking about this, because actually I felt like that. Or people have come to me and said, actually, I did feel like that, and this is what helped, which is what I'm always really interested in, like, tell me what made the difference, what helped. I'm interested in that. It was a brilliant thing to do. And then I also got loads of weird messages, got lots and lots of people getting in touch asking if I was still single, and which was like amazing. I was like, oh my God, really? Are we doing this? Got loads of people. It's just bizarre how the general public react to putting really tricky stuff on television. So it was a pretty incredible ride.
Well, I suppose in a way, without diving too deeply into psychology, but after you've been so vulnerable and honest and so open on a program, people will feel like there's a sense of connection there, right? And whether that is in a case of, I think this person might understand what I'm going through, or oh wow, this person, I know her quite intimately now, so she must want to go on a date. But there must be something in there that actually shows some degree of empathy towards the presenter in this case, who they feel like they know and can resonate with. It's a funny old one, that.
Absolutely. It was just like, yeah, definitely. I was prepared for some of the reaction, but I wasn't prepared for all of it. And in the film as well, you see us eating as a family. And it was one of those moments where, I just presumed that everyone ate the way that we eat. And kind of it turns out that most people don't. So, there was like a scene in the film. And, I wanted to show that Mark was part of like a family that loved him and that we ate together and we laughed together. And I wanted to try and bust this stereotype of a suicidal male just, being on their own in a 1-bedroom flat, drinking Stella all day. Do you know what I mean? I kind of wanted people to see that that wasn't our reality, and so people saw how we eat and saw how my mum cooks, which is very Italian and very big and very plentifully. And it was really funny because people would come up to me in the street in Liverpool and say, God, your mum's dinners look amazing. Like, can I come around and have dinner? And so it kind of became about the food, which was kind of really nice. But yeah, I just wanted to just get rid of some of the myth around what a suicidal guy looks like, because I was sick of seeing these head clutching images, and I thought he didn't look like that the last time I saw him. So I wanted to try and bust that myth.
Yeah, and I think you've touched upon a really valuable point. And unfortunately, the week before, the week I was up in Liverpool, actually, we had been notified of 5 in the end in 1 week. And these were all hospitality professionals, all from both front of house and back of house. And the common theme is that no one had a bloody clue, because you're right. In reality, there wasn't someone who was, walking around, scuffing their feet on the floor, going, oh, today's a really bad day. They were operating completely normally. No obvious signs or warning triggers, potentially, that this was running through their head, or it was something that they had been thinking about previously. So I guess the question is, like, moving on from knowing that this is an issue and the stats aren't well enough reported. Obviously we know that the Office for National Statistics says that it's one of the biggest loss of lives for men across different age groups and second biggest for women. And yet the media still don't report on it. It's still not as publicized as it should be in terms of trying to raise awareness. But the thing that we keep hearing time and time again is, I just didn't know, and there were no signs. But something you said earlier on was you wish you'd known then what you knew now. So what sort of things would have alerted you to those, perhaps, that Mark was feeling that way?
I mean, I think for me, there were a couple of things. One was that I think, again, this idea that chefs, again, he became a chef because he was a terrible waiter. We had a restaurant in Liverpool and he would spend more time wanting to know what was going on in the kitchen and having really good chats with the customers than he was kind of waiting on. So he was like a great guy, that, again, part of the myth is that people are always kind of silent and quiet. It was, nothing could be further from the truth. And he ended up in the kitchen because he kept on dropping things as a waiter and was more interested in what was going on top of the stove. So that's how he became a chef, because he was a great guy and he was interested. And I think that what I know now is that when we're thinking about, okay, so what are these common themes that can sometimes lead someone to experience suicidal thoughts and feelings? One of the big ones is loss of relationships. So breakdown of relationships. We were in the middle of a breakup and we were trying to do it sensibly for our kids, but we were still in the middle of thinking about not being together anymore. Relationships break up. Drugs and alcohol can affect our decision making. The last place he worked had a culture of kind of going for a beer after work. And I'm sure that's something that happens right through lots of different types of hospitality. We end up living our lives kind of in the nighttime when everyone else is kind of going home. We're just kind of getting started because we've only just finished work. So there were lots of different areas that I think that I was the last person to speak to him on the phone when I eventually tracked him down and asked why he hadn't gone to work. And you can imagine it, we had a 3-year-old and a 13-year-old. We couldn't afford for people not to be going into work. But I just thought he'd just not gone to work. I didn't realise it was because he obviously wasn't feeling okay. So if I'd have asked a different question during that phone call, maybe I would have got a different answer, So I think that there were things and signs that we can look out for, or just taking care of people in a different way, or having a different conversation, or just asking the question directly, are you feeling suicidal? Are you experiencing thoughts of ending your life? Tell me where you're at with what's going on with us, If I'd have had a different conversation, maybe we would have had the conversation that we're always trying to encourage people to have. But I worked in an art gallery. I knew about paintings and sculpture. I didn't know how important it was to ask the question directly. So I think that's why, I kind of feel really strongly about the work that you're doing, that I'm doing, that we're trying to really open up that conversation. Because I've got 2 boys now, and my boys are 22 and 32. And suicide is still the biggest killer of males under 50. I've got 2 males under 50. So for me, it's a no-brainer to carry on doing this work, because I need my kids, if they ever don't feel okay, to speak to somebody who knows how to ask the question and what to do if the answer is yeah. I do feel like that. So I just feel as if it's so important that we do this work, because, I don't know, sometimes we're awake when everyone else is asleep, because that's when we knock off.
Yeah, you're so right. Being able to, well, firstly, be aware, because we are naturally within hospitality, we tend to be up when most people you would expect to be asleep or starting to wind down for the evening. So from a human being kindness point of view, especially if you work in hotels, for example, then you're probably you should be aware of this subject matter, just so that you are able to stop someone who walks past you and says, "Hi, how are you doing? How was your evening? How are you?" And then if they give you a response that perhaps doesn't sit quite right, whether that's gut instinct or whether there's something that just twitches and you go, "That didn't sound right." And usually we push it down, right? We go, "Oh God, that sounded a bit strange. Oh well, have a lovely evening." But if you're in those situations and you feel it, to be able to go, "Okay, you've just said this. That's a little bit concerning. How are you feeling at the moment? Are you having thoughts of suicide?" But there's this twist in our stomach when we train on suicide prevention, and you ask an entire room of people, right? Okay, so what would you do in this situation? You've just seen this individual in a hotel. They are perhaps exhibiting some signs of risk-taking behavior, or their behavior is erratic. What do you do? And people just freeze. It's like they're not even able to say the word suicide because, well, firstly, and we know that there is this fear of, oh, well, what happens if I make it worse suddenly? Which, I think we're both very clear on the fact that clinically, we know it de-escalates by talking openly about suicide. But just being able to ask a question and being prepared that the response might be, yes, I am having this thought. And sometimes it is as completely as black and white and as completely as neutral as, yes, I am having thoughts of ending my life currently. And then having that confidence to be able just to hold that space and to be able to signpost onto relevant services and to engage in that conversation, which for many might be the first time they've actually been able to do so, right? Just because you've been bold and asked that question. If you're enjoying this week's episode, consider heading over to our website and supporting our ongoing work in destigmatizing mental illness and creating a healthier, happier, and more sustainable industry by purchasing some of our branded merchandise. We have a whole range of t-shirts, hoodies, chef's jackets, well-being journals, plus a whole host more available on worldwide dispatch. All funds raised from sales of these items go towards free-to-access e-learning content, as well as providing free support systems and help for those who may be experiencing difficulty with their mental health.
Okay, so if we're looking at the figures, and I always kind of, remind people that every single one of these figures is people like the person that I lost, We're looking at 6,000 people a year are ending their life on average in this country. 6,000. Now, that's not saying how many people are walking around with the thought in their head. I mean, I think you could probably times that by 100. And I think if people can be honest and say, actually, I've been there, I know what that feels like. And watching somebody, it's like when I meet somebody who's been bereaved by suicide and never told anybody before, their eyes kind of light up because all of a sudden there's a human connection with someone else that may have dipped their toe in the same water. Even the therapeutic value of just being able to say, I've kind of got an idea of how you might be feeling. That human connection. And when you think about a kitchen, or when you think about a restaurant, or when you think about hotels or any area of hospitality, there will be people in that moment who have experienced suicidal thoughts and feelings, and there will be other people experiencing them for the first time. And yet, if they can just be having a conversation with each other, just kind of a nod, just to almost say, okay, I know how you feel, or I might have an idea of that. Let's have a conversation. That's an incredible gift to give to somebody, just that acknowledgement. And, I don't know whether that was going on for Mark. I don't know how long his kitchen family, because I think of them as a kitchen family, they came to his funeral. And for some of them, it was the first time I'd met them, because work was busy and we had a 3-year-old. So we didn't kind of go out with his mates from work. And yet, I don't know how long they kept him going for without them even knowing it. Maybe he thought about this before, and maybe somebody had said the right thing and it kept him going. The frustration is that I'll never know. But the worrying thing is that maybe this is happening now. And maybe if we were just a bit more open and honest with each other and just checked in on a slightly deeper level, and we're just a little bit more honest about our own experiences, maybe for some people, the outcome might be a bit different.
Yeah, I totally agree. Well, it's that age-old thing in hospitality, in most industries, but hospitality is specific. And people tend to chuckle when I say this, but you walk into an environment and you go, you're right, yeah, I'm fine. And you head down and you keep on doing your mise en place, or you polish your glasses. And never, ever do we tend to stop and go, what's happening in your world then? How are you doing? Like, haven't seen you for a few days, actually. Have you been off? Have you been on holiday? What's going on? And being prepared to be able to have a courageous conversation, right? Ask with confidence and be prepared for that person to go, yeah, I had a really nice break and I went away to Malta for 4 days to see family, or, oh no, I was off because I wasn't well. Oh, really? What's going on? Is there anything that I can help with? Would you like to talk about it? And being able to put yourself in that position of, it's not vulnerability as such, but just being an empathic human being rather than going, oh, well, your problem, not mine. I'll see you later. And I think we need to practice that, because it's not something that we're not born with that skill, right? And we're certainly not taught it either.
No. And I think, again, for us in hospitality, and as I say, we had a restaurant for 23 years, so I've seen this day in, day out. It's about getting in. It's about putting your game face on. It's about putting your whites on. It's about cracking on. And it's about, what have we got in the book? What's coming in? The deliveries are coming. So sometimes it'll be a case of saying to someone, do you want to come in a bit earlier? Have you got 10 minutes for a chat? Actually making sure people get proper breaks where they can actually, and again, it's up to managers and head chefs to program this stuff in. And I think that kitchens, for me, certainly what I'm experiencing now, I think things, and through things like the podcast, your podcast as well, and the training, is I think things are changing. I hope things are changing. I hope that the kitchens of the past are not the kitchens of the future, where we're actually having different conversations and we're really thinking about the experience of the people who are creating what we're consuming. And their experience of doing that needs to be fulfilling and not just kind of pressure and blame game if something goes wrong, or if a whole service goes wrong, one person getting the blame or one person being hauled over the coals in front of everybody, which I've seen happen. So I think hopefully things are changing and that the tone of things are changing. But again, for me, it was quite funny because the morning after, because it was my dad who had the restaurant where we've all worked as a family, we've all done our stints. The next morning after, unfortunately, we'd found out what had happened and Mark was no longer with us. The next morning, my dad, this very little Greek guy, who wasn't great at communicating his feelings all of the time, turned up at my house and knocked on my door, and I opened the door, and bearing in mind this is like 12 hours after we just realised what had happened, he kind of stood on the doorstep and he handed me something, and I just put both my hands out automatically to take what it was he was giving me. And when I looked, it was two full-sized chickens with their heads still on and their feathers still on, and he just handed both their feet to me. And I was just like, what? And he couldn't say any words. And what he was trying to say was, I can't make this situation better, but I can feed you. I can, this is what I can do. And I simply took them to the kitchen and put them in the bin, because I'd never plucked a chicken before in my life. And that morning was definitely not the time to start. But for him, it was trying to communicate through food, through the way that he knew, the way that he'd been brought up. He was trying to communicate that he couldn't make this better. And so he gave me what he thought was going to help. And it turns out it didn't. But the love in that gesture, for him to have gone to the market and bought chickens, and kind of brought them to the house, the love in that gesture, the caring in that gesture was just incredible. And I think anybody outside of hospitality listening to this podcast would probably think that he was mad. But I think people who cook for people and care for people know what that gesture meant.
Yeah, right. And I think that's the thing about empathy. I personally would consider myself very empathic in regards to, I can walk into a situation or a room and feel that something's not quite right, but actually putting that empathy into practice was so difficult for me, because sympathy was such an easy thing. I felt something wasn't right and I was like, oh, well, sorry, that's your issue. But what you're saying there is your dad actually, in his own way, showed empathy by calling a spade and going, this is shit, and nothing I'm ever going to be able to say is going to take any of this pain away, but here's what I can do in my own way to help. And that's important. I don't think you necessarily have had to ever experience anything particularly to be able to show empathy. It's just that ability to be able to go, recognizing that it is terrible, it is hard. And it's the same with bereavement, isn't it? I've made a conscious effort not to say I'm sorry when someone's lost someone, because I don't want to be sorry, because when I've lost someone, that just evokes feelings of anger and frustration and almost like, well, what have you done? And so now I just say to them, like, nothing that I can say is going to make this present moment any different. But when you need me, I'm here. And when you want to talk, I'm available. Or if you want to have a drink or whatever it might be, I've got your back when you're ready. That also takes a bit of confidence, though, right? Practice.
I think you're right. And having been bereaved in this really, really shocking, this way that took years to sink in, I can't tell you how long it took for kind of the enormity of what had happened, and to kind of start to process that was a very, very long journey. But I think that the thing is to keep saying that, to keep saying to somebody, look, I know it was 6 months ago and you might not want to talk about it, but actually I'm here when you're ready to. So not just saying that once when it happened, because everyone says it, my house was like Crewe railway station for a month after it happened, because everybody was there, everybody was helping. But a year later, the core people were there, my core family, my core friends. And a year later, even less. So for some of us, and especially when someone dies by suicide, it can be really, really difficult for people to articulate and to ask and to talk and to open up conversations that actually we're all really scared of having. And I think for me, my true friends around me and my family kind of just checked in a few times. It wasn't just about checking in once. It was about kind of, I can't imagine how you're feeling, but let's go for a coffee. Or I don't know, just checking in, just now and again, really kind of keeping that door open. Because as a bereaved person, and lots of people who work in hospitality, again, experience this, it's like all there in the immediate moment, but then afterwards people don't refer to it at all. And sometimes it's because staff have changed and teams have changed, and maybe they didn't know that person worked here. But I think kind of continuing to check in and just kind of doing it in a meaningful way, I think does go a long way.
Yeah, definitely. And I want to bring it back to something that you mentioned about hospitality being certain environments, quite fast paced, quite tough environments. We've actually As of yesterday, we had some stats through from a psychological survey. I can't mention the company name, but the stats showed that 59% of respondents out of 141 people across multiple sites were struggling or in crisis with their mental health. And this was from a company-wide survey across all levels. 1 in 5 employees were at critical risk of burnout, with a further 1 in 4 at high burnout risk. And so for anyone out there listening and thinking, well, do you know what, it's probably not going to happen to us, we're different. This is a business who are very good, like, being established for years, and underneath people are still not doing well, and they haven't ever spoken to their manager, they've not spoken to anyone else, and they are in this daily battle every day trying to work out what's going on with themselves and not being able to. So this is from a general psychological occupational health study. It's just staggering, isn't it, really, those numbers?
It is absolutely staggering. But I think for me, I get asked all the time about burnout whenever I'm speaking publicly. And I don't know if people know what burnout is. I think it might have become one of those phrases that we throw around, but actually people don't realise what it is and what it looks like. When I was really close to burning out a couple of years ago, I didn't see it. It was someone else, it was members of my family who said, I don't think that things are okay with you. It's like, because I didn't realise until I was checking my emails on Christmas Day, the sight of my, I still have an old-fashioned paper diary that I always use. And the sight of my diary, I caught sight of my diary on my desk, and it made me feel physically sick. It made my stomach turn over, like, when you were on the fair when you were little. And it was that made me realise, and other people saying that I was being like a real narc, and I was kind of being really short with people, and my sleep was disturbed. And it wasn't until who've been talking about mental health for 18 years at that point, kind of thought, oh shit, this is happening. And I didn't see it. It was because other people were pointing it out. So I think burnout is, again, it sounds like a little package of thoughts and feelings that some of us have, but actually I think burnout looks different for lots of different people, because I didn't see it. I didn't see it happening to me.
I completely resonate with what you just said, and I know we spoke about this off air when we last spoke, but it's within the mental health sphere, when you're so passionately campaigning for change and you're trying to explain to people, like, you're not built like superheroes. We might like to think that we're completely impervious to anything that life throws at us, but in reality, we experience stress. It's a natural, perfectly normal part of life. And as a result, anyone that experiences stress and cortisol is at risk of burnout. The thing that you don't get with it, especially in our line of work as well, we're telling these people, and then you get this, there's no warning signs in terms of, by the way, you're slipping into burnout. In fact, it goes the complete opposite. Your brain goes, I am superhuman. I can keep doing this. All I need is a couple of bottles of beer on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday night. And I'm just going to skip exercise, and I don't really need to speak to anyone because that can wait till tomorrow. Then, oh, do you know what? I don't need to shower today. And then all of a sudden, you're like, oh, perhaps I will just do an extra 4 hours work today, because if I don't do it, no one else is going to do it. And then you just get stuck in that cycle. And before you know it, that just accelerates. And it's not until something happens, like for me, smashing a glass and not feeling anything, and my physical health starting to slip as well as my mental health, that, as you say, someone goes, are you all right? Are you okay? You don't seem your usual self. And you're like, yeah, no, adamant, I'm fine. But all of a sudden, if you're lucky, you can catch it at that stage, which by then is already too late. But, you have to then go, fuck, I've just been completely and utterly stitched up by my own brain.
Absolutely. And I think a piece of work that we sometimes do when I'm working with emergency services, for instance, we do an exercise where we make a list of our risk factors, what might make us feel a bit risky, what might put us at risk, what pressures in our lives might not be great for us. But then on the same piece of paper, we do a list of protective factors. What are our individual protective factors? So that might be going for a run, it might be going for I don't know, it might be cooking, it might be cleaning, it might be whatever it is. What are the factors that are offering you protection from burnout, protection psychologically and mental health wise? And I think for some people, they haven't realized up until that point that you can actually make a list of these things that are your personal protective factors. When other people are saying, actually, are you okay? It might be the fact that we've got to dial up the protective factors. You know what I mean? So there are things that we all do naturally to take care of ourselves. And sometimes they're the things that stop because we haven't got time. So we haven't got time to go for a run, haven't got time to go to the gym, haven't got time to cook for ourselves well because we've spent 12 hours cooking for everybody else. So we're going to go home and have a pot noodle, and that's definitely speaking from experience. And I think sometimes if you just make a list or have a conversation about what's working for you, how do you take care of yourself? What are your protective factors? I think sometimes that can really help us to just have a little moment where we're actually considering our own self-care and what are those things that are keeping us safe. For some people, it might be amazing sex. It might be something that's kind of sitting down, reading a book, having more than a 5-minute shower. I don't know, whatever it is that makes you feel good and balances out the stress and balances out the risk is something that I think we don't pay attention to enough. I think for me, I'd have everybody listening to this kind of make a little list and anywhere on a little post-it, write your protective factors down, write down what they are. And if you haven't got any, then we need to find you some protective factors.
I absolutely love that. I was chatting to, funny enough, one of the teams. Each training, I think, although you may agree with me, you may disagree here, but with training, although you've got your core objectives, it's very much dependent on the group that you're training, and it can take so many different twists and turns. And sometimes you'll have this bloody aha moment. And I was training that team in Liverpool, and we started talking about unhelpful and helpful coping strategies. And what do we do? What does it look like when you're being triggered by stress? And someone said, well, when I'm stressed, the best thing to do is to open up my phone and I scroll through Instagram. And I said, okay, why? What are you looking for? And they're like, I don't know, just to release, just to get away. And I was like, okay, how's that working out for you? How have you felt? Well, I feel shit about myself afterwards because I'm looking at people who've had photoshopped bodies and living lives in Maldives.
Yeah.
They're rich and successful, or what appears to be all of this falsity. I said, okay, so you understand that when you're feeling stressed, you're engaging in this unhelpful mechanism, which is okay in small doses, but if that's something that's your default, what else can you do? And they're like, well, when I'm scrolling through Instagram, I'm not getting any of the chores done, or I'm not looking after myself, or I haven't spoken to my kids. And you're like, well, great, already here you've got, exactly as you're saying, your protective and your non-protective mechanisms. And I think we all just need to be a little bit more honest with ourselves and conscious and go, and it's okay to indulge, right? If you've had a bad day and you do want to go down the pub with your mates or whatever it might be, then you are okay to do that. But then understanding that when you get that sudden twist in your stomach that goes, oh yeah, do you know what? Now I'm out. Now I could go, that you're going to have to try and put that circuit breaker in place. How do you spot that behavior? How do you stop it? And then what do you swap it with that's healthy and more sustainable?
Absolutely. But again, I think everybody's protective factors or self-care is different, but I think it's something that, I always love it when I hear about different restaurants that have opened, but actually they're closed 2 days a week. And they're closed, not because they haven't got any customers, because they've got way too many customers, but actually they're giving the whole of the kitchen a break. I really, really love that concept of everybody just having 2 days off and then giving their all for like the rest of the time, But I think it's like an amazing way to start, that everybody's just putting their own, it's not a choice. You don't choose whether you're going to come in on shift that day. The place is locked down, so you're not going in. I just think that sometimes that kind of setting that tone for self-care, setting that tone for putting people rather than kind of plates first is an amazing way to go. And I think you get more out of your teams if you do that, if you set that tone, if you're taking care of yourself and you're setting that tone. I think it's definitely the way to go.
Yeah, I would agree. There's two things that you mentioned there, actually, which is one, lead by fucking example. It's all very well and good getting your team to do 35, 40-hour weeks because you feel like you're doing them a favor. But trust me, from anyone who's ever been young and wants to make an impression, or even if you're not young and you want to make an impression and progress within a business, your boss can tell you, have 5 days off a week. It's perfectly okay. But if you're looking at them doing 7 days a week, 8-hour weeks, then you're just going, no, I feel guilty now. I can't have that time off because you don't. And so lead by bloody example. And the other thing is, if you are prepared to lead by example, do shut the business for 2 days, because it's not just the fact that, yes, all your team get a day off, but it's the fact that they're not getting those micro stressors. They're not worrying about what they haven't done the day before. They're not suddenly concerned that, when they pick up their phone and they see someone phoning them, that there's going to be a problem that they have to be called in for. And to be quite frank, I think with most businesses, you're going to have those days where you're actually making a lost leader on 1 or 2 days of the week. So do yourself a favor and shut during those days. Consolidate.
Absolutely. You witnessed when we were on the call last week when we were planning this, you witnessed what I do to take care of myself now, because I'd spent about 10 years on stage kind of lying about what I was doing to take care of myself. So now I have to actually do something because I was just like standing up there saying all the right things,
That literally, I mean, it's like you and I are inside each other's brains, because I was just about to say, so Angela, tell me, where is the bread? Which I promised you I would throw into the conversation, but you brought it up. You brought it up before I got a chance. So where is the bread, Angela?
Only because I've got one on the go now. So yeah, I started making sourdough. So my brother-in-law came over from Copenhagen and noticed that I wasn't great and I was knackered and I wasn't myself. And he made me a sourdough starter before he left to go back to Copenhagen. Bought me a book about sourdough and left it with me, and that was about 3 years ago. And then publicly got on my Twitter once he'd gone back to Copenhagen, was literally tweeting to me so everyone could see, where's the bread? I was like, he was like tweeting pictures of his like amazing loaves. And so I just thought, well, my competitive edge got the better of me. And so I started making sourdough loaves. And now I've got an Instagram called Superstar Sourdough, because I think sourdough is the superstar of the bread world. And so now I number my loaves because they're kind of, each one's made with love. So I'm up to loaf 233, which you saw coming out the oven last week. So yeah, so I make sourdough because it means that I can't be touching a screen, or I can't be doing anything with my hands, because I've got them kind of wrist deep in flour and water and salt. So that's what I've been doing, and I absolutely love it.
I was very, very fortunate to see. I mean, unfortunately, we don't have smell-o-vision at this moment in time. Virtual technology is great. It allows us to speak to people from around the world that we never would have met before, but I still can't smell that freshly baked bread. I feel
smell bread.
I feel most disheartened.
Yeah.
At some stage, I will have to pick up one of your sourdough loaves when I'm next in the area.
Absolutely, I'll make you one.
Yeah, or even try it myself. Do you know what? I went through that stage over lockdown of making focaccia because, well, everyone was doing it. And I thought, I've never actually made any bread before. And I did find it so therapeutic.
Really?
Yeah. There were moments where the dough was too sticky. Then all of a sudden you were in a right old mess because it's all over your hands. And then you have to think about how you get out of it. But when you actually make something and you've got a final product at the end of it that you can slather in butter and eat and you go, yeah, right. That was good. You can punch the dough if you want, or you can gently knead it. But there's so many different ways that whole process, you have to be patient because you can't rush it, right?
Absolutely. And I think the thing is that you think naturally, because you're really, really busy, that giving you something else to do that needs feeding and keeping warm and, is going to be like an extra layer of stress. But actually, it's like a different thing. There's something really nurturing about being able to make something that everyone else can eat, that's kind of just flour, water and salt. And there's just something really reductive and going right back to basics about that. And I think for me, it's definitely been like, I've found like my main kind of protective factor, and it's a really good thing. And my family are massively benefiting from it. So, and it just feels as if it's like a communal thing as well. They get the olive oil out and they have a conversation about it, and they're not shy in their criticism. They'll tell you if something's like been a bit overproved or a bit underbaked or whatever, they're not shy about it. But there's just something amazing about doing something with your hands and actually creating something that other people can, I don't know, it's why lots of you guys become chefs in the first place, creating something out of amazing ingredients and just kind of sharing it, or bringing kind of pleasure to people. And it sounds really simple, but actually it's kind of, I don't know, I think it's what prevented me from burning out, really. But I remember when Mark was training to be a chef and he went through that. Do you all go through this thing where you start making potato rosties? Do you all start off making this really simple? Do you all have to learn how to make these things? Because we were so sick of eating them. We were eating them all the time because he was basically trialing his recipes on us. It was crazy. So, so I was the same with the bread.
Yes, yeah. It usually involves carbohydrates of some weird shape or form. For me, it's roasties. Trying to get that perfect roastie, making sure you've got the right Maris Piper or you've got your King Edward. It's got to be in the right season, not too much sugar, not too much starch. Making sure you've got the right fat. You're not leaving it in for too long. I don't know. I don't think I could ever get bored of rosties or roasties, though. Just keep feeding me.
Honestly. Yeah.
And I think that brings us to a very hungry and very appetizing close. But I want to thank you, Angela, for having such a frank, open conversation about something which I know is still very difficult. And I hope that for those out there who are listening to this still now, it prompts you to learn more. I mean, you do a lot of work in this particular field. So are there any resources or content that you can signpost to people for assistance?
Definitely. I just want to say thank you so much for having me on. It's been incredible to have this conversation with you. I think the work you're doing is amazing, and I was delighted to kind of learn more about it. I think for me, one of the resources that I always recommend is the Hub of Hope, which is a free app. I'm a trustee of the Hub of Hope. And basically, it's a free app. It's available throughout the UK and now in Northern Ireland as well. And basically, you can just put your postcode into the app and it will come up and tell you what's around you. So the support services that are around you, support services for mental health and some physical health as well. There are loads of different resources on there for different diagnoses, for different experiences. There's a bereavement part to the app as well. And if you just have a look on that, again, it's free, completely free. But if you know somebody who you think is struggling, or somebody who might just benefit, or somebody who wants to give a bit back, actually, someone who's been helped and kind of wants to give a bit back, then they can have a look on the Hub of Hope and you can just find where you might be able to go and do some volunteering, or you might be able to go to a support group if you need to, or just the right phone number. So have a look at the Hub of Hope. You can download it on Android or you can download it on Apple, and it's free. There's a website as well, so you can just have a look at that. So Hub of Hope, I'd definitely recommend that.
Wonderful. And I think Jake and I have been playing message ping pong for quite some time. So
have you?
very overdue a coffee. So to sit down and talk about how we can work together, how the Hub of Hope and also the Burnt Chef Project can start to work together. We have a massive audience, so our downloads are in sort of 112 countries now. If people aren't necessarily in the UK and they, would need some assistance with this, are there any international enterprises, or is there any sort of best port of call for anyone who wants assistance?
I think whichever country you're in, I think there is always something. It's just a case of finding it. And I think just looking for help or linking in with whoever is your kind of primary care provider or your doctor or whatever, I think that's usually a good way to go. But again, have a look at the Hub, because if you look at the Hub, you can get it from anywhere in the world. You can just have a look at it. You might not be able to access all the services, but you can certainly have a look at it, and it might kind of, give you an idea of different services in your country or your area that you might be able to contact. So yeah, it will always give you an answer. It will always give you an idea of where you might look in your own country.
Perfect, thank you. And just for reference, if anyone does want to learn more specifically about this subject matter or how to support those who have recently come into contact with suicide, then we do provide free training on the Burnt Chef Academy, which can also be downloaded on Android and iPhone, and also accessible through the World Wide Web on your normal browser as well. So in there'll be a whole host of content, education, and also signposting to resources in various parts around the world. So do check that out. But Angela, thank you ever so much, and looking forward to getting a date in the diary where we can meet up and share some bread. I'm definitely hungry for it.
That would be wonderful. And again, I'm on Twitter and I'm on Instagram. So if anyone wants to get in touch or there's any other information that I can give to people, really, really happy. And I will tweet about this podcast as well so that people can find you as well.
Wonderful. Thank you. Is it just Superstar Sourdough they can find you at, or are there other addresses?
No, you can find me under Angela Samata as well. So just at Angela Samata on Twitter and the same on Instagram as well.
Lovely. Angela, thanks ever so much.